This next video is going to be about comparing another two different objectives. The first objective is maximising the net present value, which is our base case. The second objective is going to be maximising the period cash flow. So we're going to be selecting this maximising the period cash flow option for our comparison case, and we're going to be using the 10 sequence Antarctica mine. I'm going to be focusing on analysing the results from this case. So if we start looking at the results, you can see in the first table the two different options that are being considered. You have the maximising the NPV, which is the $7.7 billion, and we've actually dropped some money, only going to $7.4 billion for the maximising the period cash flow. So let's make sure we understand what maximising the period cash flow is actually doing. So what happens in this objective is that as every piece of rock is being mined, it investigates, if I say increase the cut-off grade, do I make more money per year? So I don't actually care about the total value of the project. I'm just trying to look at the current period and see, do I actually make more money in that period? And if I do, then I'll increase the cut-off grade. If I don't, I'll reduce the cut-off grade. What you'd expect to find is some very high cash flows using this method. And it kind of makes a lot of sense to people that think, well, look, I have to make more money now. And how can we make more money? Well, there are ways to make more money. And this objective of maximising the period cash flow in every period of the mine life is a way to do that. But it comes at a cost. And we're going to be looking at why, when you follow this objective, you actually lose shareholder value, which is best measured by net present value. Now, some of the other metrics are the mine life. You can see we've actually lost some mine life. So about 4 years we've lost in mine life. We're processing less material. It's quite high-grade material, but we have actually less material that we're processing, and we're winding up the mine a little bit earlier. So that's kind of a good thing in terms of cost per year. We've got less cost per year. The sort of G&A and annual costs, they're smaller, so we can look at that. Now, of these numbers, the most important number is the net present value. So we've plotted it in this pie chart, and you can see we've lost nearly 5% of the value here. So look, 5% might not seem like a lot of value, but it's still, when you're trying to squeeze out another couple of percent of value, 5% is quite a lot. In this case, it amounts to like $360 million. So it'll change for every individual mine. You can't say that it's always going to be 5% worse than maximising the net present value. But if this objective is being followed to determine your mining schedule and your decisions, then you probably are losing some money for the shareholders. So let's have a look at exactly why we lose that value. So firstly, we'll look at the mining schedule and what actually were the different decisions made. So the top schedule is the base case, and the second one is the maximising the period cash flow. So what you can see here is, firstly, the base case schedule lasts quite a bit longer. So this one finishes in 2036 as opposed to 2032. So we've lost about 4 years. How we lost that time was we mined more material. You can see more material being mined, still processing about the same amount, still about 25 million tonnes, but we mined more material and we raised the cut-off grades. So you can see we're poking up to $9.28 a tonne here for quite a lot of the schedule, whereas the maximum NPV case, we're sitting around 6.8 a lot of the schedule, up in a couple of years to $8 a tonne, but on average we're quite a bit lower than $8 a tonne, maybe down at 6.8 or down 5.6, depending on the period. So let's have a look at the value now as to the costs and revenues, where that value went. What you can see here is in the new case, the comparison case where we go for maximising the period cash flow, our revenues are quite high for the whole period of the schedule. So you can see 1.8, 1.9, numbers like this, quite high values per year throughout the schedule, whereas our base case, it does get up to sort of 1.8, but it doesn't stay there. It comes down lower to 1.5, 1.6, 1.4, eventually even 1.36. So it drops, our total revenue drops, and likewise our profits also drop, down to numbers like 680 at the end of the year, at the end of the schedule, whereas here we're still up close to $1 billion even in the last couple of periods of the mine life. So we have higher values here. That means that our discounted cash flows are also higher in the earlier years, but we just have less years. We're just missing 4 years of ore. And so even though we've brought value forward, we've brought it forward at the expense of the mine life and processing that material. And we've brought too much forward and wasted the value that we could have got from that resource. So let's have a look at some of the numbers. So if we have a look at our total tonnes of ore, we see that we've got 415 million tonnes for our base case, but only 313 for our maximising the period cash flow. We have lost metal. Our total metal is lower. Our total gold and copper is lower. Sure, that means our costs are lower, but also our revenue is significantly lower. On average, if you look at the cut-off grade, our cut-off grade is quite a bit higher here. So we're looking at, on average, about $6 a tonne for the base case and nearly $8 a tonne for maximising the period cash flow. Even though we've got the higher grade material, we've made more money more quickly, we haven't made it for as long. And that's really where the discounted cash flow suffers, is that you just don't have those cash flows for as long. We end up only with 12.7 years instead of 16.5 years. So feel free to have a look down through the individual cash flows, the individual pieces of rock that are being scheduled, and see how much of that rock went to ore, what the cut-off grade was for those pieces of rock, how much went to waste, and you can check that why we end up with a lower net present value. Only 5% lower, but look, 5% is a decent amount. So as you can see, not every objective maximises the return for shareholders. So sometimes they're well aligned. In fact, you can see in the early periods, these were quite closely aligned. In the first couple of years, we're looking at 6.8 here on both of them. So in the first few years, it was quite closely aligned, but in the last few years, it was significantly less. Lower cut-off grades and significant changes in the schedule. So different objectives produce different schedules, produce different returns for shareholders. Sometimes they're aligned, normally they're not. They're similar amounts of work to produce a different schedule, but you get a worse value. So even if it's only 5% worse, it's still a significant number when you look at the total millions of dollars for the project. So it's worth checking out. If people are suggesting that we use the maximum cash flow, making a bit more money this year, keep in mind what the impact on the net present value of the project is. Feel free to leave some comments below and go make the most of the resources that we steward.